Welcome to our podcast, The Better You Are, The Better You Are. Whether it is physically, mentally, or spiritually, when you know better, you can do better. And when you do better, you'll be better. On this podcast, we share knowledge, expertise, opinions, and experiences. All things that can help you to change the game. By the time we're done, it's hard for you not to be encouraged. So join us. The better you are, the better you are.
If we don't know what the real problem is, we can't get the real answer. And so I deal with things like, it's access to care. Black women just don't come into care early enough, and other things. There's racism and the effects from childhood on up that affect, women and men internally that affect their outcomes. So we're definitely going to come back to that. But what I'd like to do is also roll back to Caroline's story, and even at a young age, and statistics that I've read that females are a little bit more prone to depression than males are. And that particularly at the, from what I understand, you guys certainly are the experts. What I read was that up to age 12 or 13, it's about equal, but then it starts changing, and that females become more predisposed to that. And that there are maybe some factors like social media and other things, or people feeling I have to protect this young girl from anything. And as you point out, Hazel, just even the parents wanting to protect all their children, but for some reason I need to protect my females a little bit more. They need extra help, and that's fine, but you need some. I think, at least I raised my daughters, we can't protect them from everything, and it's not good to protect them from everything. And we know they're going to face trials and tribulations later on in life. And so how do if I protect them from all those, they don't know how to address them earlier on. And I don't know if why don't we go with you, Caroline, first, and then maybe hear what Hazel has to say.
Well, before your question,
and then go to Glinda.
Before your question, there was there were a couple things that were said that just really rose up in me. One, when Hazel was talking about the pervasiveness of racial identity and colorism and how those just kept poking, and then talked also about not feeling good enough. I wasn't really dealing so much with it at home because my parents just did not know how to address it. And so I just closed myself up. So they weren't saying things that made me feel unworthy. They just weren't saying much of anything. They were frightened. They didn't know what to do. And I was just locked myself basically in my room. But the one feeling that I could identify was that I felt unworthy. And I felt like I was unseen, that I was unliked. And even that followed me for so long. And even once I talked about my faith, and once my faith grew, as an adult, often I would pray. And when I was hurting, I would say to the Lord, Lord, I know you love me, but why don't you like me?
Amen.
And I just felt unliked, period. Now, I know and something that Glinda said about we don't know what's on the other side, and we lose that opportunity. I'm so grateful that I got to see what was on the other side. Yeah. And that today I not only know that I'm loved, but I also know I'm liked. And I know God especially likes me as well. And so I can always lean on that. And I wanted to make that point, that I felt so unworthy, but now I realize that I'm worthy. I realize that I'm loved, and I realize that I'm liked as well. And just that made all the difference in the world to internalize that. And so a lot of times now I think I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have the opportunity to really reach out to other people. And there's so much joy in knowing that what you've been through is being used for such a great purpose, and how much it's been able to help other people. There's a joy in that. And so I love the fact that I got to see what was on the other side. I just wanted to make that point.
Amen. I think that's impressive. And it brings me to the scripture that all things work together for good. And so if you can just stay through the journey, which is what, I try to teach young people, through the journey, there's purpose to what's going on and serve you, because God doesn't mess around. All these things work together for whatever God has planned for you later. So don't give up in the middle of the journey. But I would like to address one that Caroline felt isolated, and she felt embarrassed, and she was hurt by things that people said to her. And I've had parents, women approach me at church and other things who know that we do these type of programs. So you have to address, how do I recognize depression and concerns in my child? And then two, what are some things that parents, she said her parents didn't know what to do. What are some things parents can do? And so maybe I'll start with you, recognize it, and maybe Glenda, you can help think of some things that we can help parents identify what they can do on that.
Well, I think, the thing around depression with Black girls, in particular, I think you said in your what you saw in the studies that it's more prevalent, but it's harder to recognize, because for many Black girls, the symptoms and signs look totally different. Oftentimes it's not your classic textbook, right? And so Caroline, just even as she wrapped up and tied in her thoughts on, just what Dr. Rawls and I shared, that's clear, right? Like her mom and dad, they didn't know, right? She kind of locked it to herself. But I imagine, and please, Miss Caroline, correct me if I'm wrong, I imagine she showed up still. I imagine she still did well in school.
Absolutely.
I imagine she was still very active in other activities, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the signs don't always look the same, but we can hear it in things like, I feel alone, or no one likes me, disorganization maybe in their space. Is a tall tale sign. Hard to keep the room clean, hard to keep, books and notes and all of that stuff organized, those kinds of things. And so that continues on even into young adulthood and into adulthood, where it can get worse. So now there's this hyper focus on school, maybe, or hyper focus on work. And maybe even start telling oneself, oh, I'm just a workaholic, right? Or whatever the case may be. And I know a lot of experts don't like this saying, just based off of my researching and reading. And I've used it very loosely, the high functioning depression, right? And so we look at we look at individuals like who is it? Was it last year or the year before? The young lady, 30-something years old.
Chesley Christ?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Very well accomplished. All of these things going for her. Parents did not know. No one knew, right? And so, what I look for in the room when working with clients, or even when I'm on platforms like this, when you notice that teen, that young adult, and that girl, that young woman, they're always talking about you. They're always concerned about what's going on in your life, and rarely talk about them. That's something to kind of pay attention to. If everything is always going fine, if everything's always going well, and so our educators will miss it, and all the other adults working with these young girls will miss it, because it doesn't look like the classic textbook definition of depression, especially in young Black girls.
Wow.
I have a friend who's a pediatrician. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let Dr. Rawls slam dunk this one. So
no, I was going to just build on what Hazel was saying. And it's so true, is that the signs, especially in adolescence for boys and girls, is not necessarily always what's in the textbook. And that's consistent with what we know as mental health professionals. And I would throw out there irritability. I think one of the things that we forget is that sometimes when we think about depression, we always think about this sadness and things like that. But I liked how Hazel underscored that you can also be very high functioning and experiencing depression. You can also be very irritable and experience depression. And someone would think, well, I am not necessarily equating anger with depression, but that can be a symptom. And so going back to what Hazel said, there's a lot of things that may be unusual about really trying to pinpoint depression in young adults and young people, particularly if you are doing everything right, you're getting good grades and getting and being, as Hazel mentioned, very high functioning. I think one of the things that you talked about, Lauren, is what should parents do? And I think constantly checking in to understand how your child is feeling. And I think one of the things is emotions are so scary to talk about. Emotions are so, we don't necessarily always want to engage a conversation with emotion. Sometimes we'll ask, well, how's your test? How's things going in school? And this very open-ended feeling, but honey, are you okay? And I think the other thing is noticing and watching patterns of behavior. Noticing that, as Hazel mentioned, I've noticed the room has not been cleaned in a little. Is this normal for your child, or is this something that is appearing? I noticed she hasn't been out with her friends or talking on the phone. Her normal behavior is X, and I'm seeing something different. I'm seeing Y. I think the other thing is to also for parents to recognize within themselves that talking about and dealing with mental health issues are challenging. And sometimes the hesitation I think about Caroline's story about her parents being very supportive, but not knowing what to do. Mm-hmm. And that is very common because sometimes when you check in and you notice there's changes in behaviors, you're noticing that there's patterns and you suspect as a parent, something is wrong here. There is a fear sometimes of wanting to engage it because you just don't know how to react. You don't know what to do and you don't know how to respond. But I would say rest assured, because there are people like myself and Hazel who want to help families, want to help young people, this is what we've been called to do. And so I just want to encourage parents that you're not alone and that there is help out here to try to assist with having these conversations. And I think the other thing is in addition to noticing your child, noticing patterns of behavior, in addition to checking in, I think also parents need to find support, because when you're dealing with a child that has significant, and there are a range of mental health. While we're situating this conversation on depression, there are a range of mental health issues that students, kids, that are going through, young adults are going through. And sometimes it can be emotionally taxing on the parent. And so sometimes they also may need support to even address their own child's mental health needs, because it's so emotionally draining for them. And so I also think if you are also a parent that also is sensing that you're tired and that you are also feeling drained, trying to address some of your own child's mental health concerns, you may also need to seek out and get some help and get some assistance as well in order to better support your child, your young adult.
Well, you will address something, Lauren, that I read just real quick. I read something as I was looking into depression and suicide that said often people are nervous to ask someone beyond just not knowing how to address it, but they're nervous to ask because they think it'll push someone into suicide. And I read that the statistics show that that's not the case. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. I ask, of course, I have to in my work, but there is that fear, like even just like your everyday person who, oh, I probably shouldn't ask because I'm planting that seed on them. No, you're not. You're not. If they have the thoughts, whether they're passive or active, they still have the thoughts. Whether they have a plan or don't have a plan, they still have the thoughts. Whether they are completely sold on executing that plan or not, it's still within them. So asking is actually, I think, a way to be proactive and in some cases intervene, right? And so yes, that is not the case. I did want to say to something that Dr. Rawls was saying about checking in with your child's emotions and not just sticking with the like, how's school going? And, how did you do on the team or what have you, but really checking in. When I work with teens often, preteens and teenagers, you get a lot of I don't knows. And one of the things that the parents come to me and they're frustrated and they're like, well, every time I ask, they say they don't know. They don't know. They don't know. But when I ask, I'm like, okay, so let's explore the I don't know. One, it's okay that you don't know, but let's explore it a little bit. Is your I don't know because you truly do not know? Like you legit do not know what it is that you're feeling, what it is that's going on. You don't know. Or is it that you don't know because you don't feel safe to say the thing that you do know?
Mm.
Or is it that you don't know because you have an idea of what you know, you are having a hard time finding words to explain what you know or to describe what you know? That requires the parents to slow down in their emotional reactivity in order to stick with their child in unpacking and exploring their I don't know. And if the child says, and they're honest and say, I know, I just don't feel comfortable sharing, or I don't feel safe to share, well, then what do we need to do to establish a space within our dynamic that you feel safe to share? Or do we need to bring someone else in?
What are some ways that people can bring somebody else in? And I know that, I work with a pediatrician who told me a story of one of her patients came in. She was 12 years old, came in with her mom, and her mom said, "Oh yeah, she's doing great. She just was reading in her room all day over the holiday, and she was making jewelry all day. And it turned out she was up cutting her arm all day. And the doctor recognized that and helped her get into help. But what if you don't take your daughter to the pediatrician and you think, maybe things are fine, but or you now that you've heard this, you're like, well, maybe." So basically, my thought is that you may not recognize there's a concern. You may think things are fine, or you may have an experience like Caroline's, where my daughter tried to commit suicide or shot a gun into the stove. And I don't think that's, a typical thing. I'm a little bit concerned, but I don't know what to do. Who can I reach out to try and help me through this? And things may turn out to be fine, but as you say, don't be afraid to approach. So if I approach my daughters and they say, well, no, I'm fine, and I, maybe irritate them a little bit, but they're fine, then we're good. But if she's not really fine and I've started an avenue of discussion or help, then I'm better off for that. So what are some resources that we might utilize? Let's start with you, Glenda.
I definitely think a therapist would definitely be a good resource. I think the other is definitely your primary care, your medical professional. They like to work hand in hand and they understand the connection between the mind and the body. And so oftentimes they will also have places to refer. I think also talking with other friends and family members, trying to get a support? Have you noticed anything different? I think that's the part of it, is noticing, because I think oftentimes children, young adults want, and it goes back to something that Caroline talked about, want to be seen and noticed. And I think they also want other people to know when they may also be experiencing some distress. And so I think it's when they don't feel like they can share, I think we do have to unpack that. And I love what Hazel talked about in terms of asking those questions about whether or not someone feels safe to share. And I think the larger question for you, for parents, is, am I presenting myself to my child as someone that could share their emotions? Mm-hmm. I think oftentimes, parents would love to have their children tell them everything that's happening. And there's some relationships and some dynamics that happens. But I think sometimes parents are not aware of the fact that there are some things that their child may not be comfortable or as comfortable sharing. And emotions are one of those things. And so the question becomes, how are you making it safe for your child to share? Do they feel if they shared something that you would reject them or feel differently for them, or would they get in trouble for it? These are all the things that may be going through a young person's mind about holding some of the thoughts and feelings they may have about the internal distress that they're having. And so the question becomes, are you making it safe? Are you creating room for your child to be able to really share their emotions? And then the other question is, when they do, how have you responded in the past? Because a child will use that as a way to understand how my child, how my parent will respond to me in the future if I share a response, a reaction. And oftentimes I think we have to move away from not making room for that and saying, oh, you'll just get better, or you just, dust your foot off. Sometimes that works for some children, and some children are a little bit more introspective and sensitive. And I think sometimes we have to understand that some people may not always process experiences and situations in the same way. And so they may have a more longer time processing what happens. They may be internalizing some things that are happening, and it may take them a while to really be able to get to a place where they can kind of talk with and wrestle with some of those emotions. So that's why creating that environment where they feel more safe to share is important. And so I think talking to your pediatrician, I mean, even in the example that you used, Dr. Lauren, you talked about that she did talk to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician was also noticing. And that's really the two things. The key things is communication, conversations, talking, and noticing signs, noticing when things are off, noticing, in that case, the physician noticed the scars. And so it really takes noticing and communication. It also takes creating room and space for folks, for children, young girls, adolescents, young adults, to be able to share and express their emotions. And the other part of it is not having that judgment, because I think one of the things, especially when people are sharing their emotions, one of the things that, and Hazel knows this, that's part of the reason why people come to counseling, because they want a space that's non-judgmental. And so they want a space where I can completely share my emotions and be transparent, and I won't be judged for that. Someone won't tell me what I'm thinking is right, wrong, or indifferent, but they're there to really just listen. And I think that that's one of the reasons why they want to come to counseling and want to come to a therapist, is because that's something that they can expect and hopefully rely on when they do choose to seek out help.
Dr. Glenda, when you shared about the creating space, I thought about the single parent, right? Who is working hard, trying to make ends meet, or even the the household where there are two parents or two adults, caregivers or what have you, but they're still struggling to keep the basic necessities the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the very basic, food and housing and safety and all that. And they're under a lot of stress. And so then at times I'll work with kids and they'll say, well, I don't want to share this with my parent because I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to burden them with this. So in the creating the space, even though it may be unintentional, the lived circumstances have created such an environment that the child feels responsible to not be yet another stressor on the parents, right? And this could happen in any household, right? Depending on how that space is curated, right? Whether it's done out of just survival and trying to make ends meet, or they're not worried about, making ends meet. Things are good financially and everybody got what they need and want and then some, but the demands of the jobs of the caregivers are so high that it's creating a stressful environment, right? So I've seen it on both spectrums, and the child doesn't want to share because they don't want to be another burden. They don't want to be another stressor. And so you said something earlier, Dr. Glenda, that really resonated with me, is for parents to also, in addition to reaching out to other people, but checking in on themselves and their wellness, right? Because if I am worked up in stress and anxiety, regardless of what is attributed to it, I'm modeling something for my child. And now my child will not come and talk to me about their stressors and their anxieties and their sadness and all the things, because this is what they're seeing, right? Or you're very reactive to your child, right? So you saying that just made me think of, I have faces in my head, but making me think of scenarios that I've been a part of in helping parents just kind of navigate and soothe and regulate themselves so that we can create that emotional safety space in the home and in the relational dynamic.
Thank you for listening in today. Weren't you inspired, encouraged, and uplifted? We hope so, because we're praying the best for you. Join us again next time for more betterment, because the better you are, the better you are.